Hi class, we're back for the second lecture in today's sequence. The first half we talked a little bit about the introduction to what we think about astrobiology, and so we're going to continue just a little bit more with that to kind of show you the landscape of where most people are when they think about this, in particular where scientists are when they think about this. And then over the course of the rest of the quarter, what we're going to do is we're going to fill in all the ways people think about this, all the things we know, all the data we have that kind of helps push people in one direction or another. Okay, so let's go ahead and start those slides. Okay, so the question that we want to talk about here in this segment really is, what are the chances that there may be life out there? What do people think? And it's kind of the question that really is at the heart of all of this. It's the one that all of us really think about when we stand out and we look up at the sky and we ask whether or not there's life elsewhere. It's always really just a question of what's the probability, what's the likelihood that there is life elsewhere. So I'm going to start. I just want to talk about what the intuition about this is and what the possible answers are and how we're going to frame that in the context of scientific approaches. And that will lead to what I call the two philosophies, which are the kind of extreme viewpoints about this matter. Okay, and we'll come back to those two philosophies are named. We'll come back to them over and over again this quarter. So I wanted to introduce them early so you can start thinking about them and figure out where you personally already sit in this spectrum of possibilities. So when you are asked about any question, it doesn't matter whether or not it's about astrobiology and life in the universe or anything that you might get asked about. There are kind of two responses you can have. One response is your personal intuition. And this is how most of us respond to everything in the world. It's your personal reaction you have, and it's completely based on your previous experiences, things that have happened to you or things that you've done or things that you've seen. And it's also based on what exposures you've had already. What have you been taught? What have you been told? Who have you previously talked to? What ideas have you had time to think about and explore and mull over and turn around and argue with friends about over barbecues on a Saturday? Okay. The other approach is what I call scientific intuition. And scientific intuition doesn't necessarily always agree with your personal intuition. And it takes a bit of practice to pay attention to scientific intuition precisely because of that. Scientific intuition is a dogged adherence to the fact that everything that you can say, every question you can answer, can only be answered if you have some data or some observations, evidence to address the question. And what you can say is completely based on the quality of that data. If you have really great data or you have a lot of data, sometimes you can answer a question definitively. Am I breathing air? Yes, I can tell. I can do experiments to prove I'm breathing air. So it's really that question about data that drives whether or not science can or will be able to help us in answering questions. And it's certainly that acquisition of data that has made the study of astrobiology possible in the modern era. And we'll come back to that topic many, many times. So we're starting with this question: does life exist elsewhere in the universe? And if you ask people this question, they respond in one of two ways. What I call the confident way and what I call the circumspect way. The confident way, people will say, definitely life exists elsewhere, or definitely life doesn't exist elsewhere. Okay, and the more circumspect way is people will be like, well, maybe life exists elsewhere, or maybe they'll say, maybe life doesn't exist elsewhere. Okay, so your kind of level of confidence in how you deliver an answer to a question like, is there life elsewhere, is often driven by your personal intuition. Do you definitely think there's life elsewhere or not? Or are you kind of ambivalent, or are you kind of uncertain? And then you might use this more circumspect style of answers. Any given person may use any way of answering this question that we've described here. But I will say, and I will point out, that science will never, ever be able to provide the answer that there is definitely not life elsewhere in the universe. And that's just a matter of practical fact. The universe is far too big, and there are far too many planets and far too many places in the universe, and we don't know enough about life, nor will we ever know enough about life probably, that we would ever be able to say, nope, we've looked everywhere, we're confident no life exists other than here on Earth. Okay, that's just an impossibility. Science can absolutely tell us that life definitely does exist somewhere, but it's never going to be able to tell us life definitely doesn't exist somewhere. It'll always be able to say maybe it does or maybe it's not, and that's really the subject of this course for the whole term, right? We're going to be over on that maybe side. But on the definite side, science never going to be able to say definitely not. Science can only tell you, give you an answer to this question that's in adherence with how good the data we have on this subject is. Okay, and one of the themes we'll come back to over and over in this course is our data is constantly changing, and it's improving, it's getting better, but we're definitely not going to be able to say Earth is the only place life exists in the universe. Okay, one thing I like to remind people of to kind of convince you that that's true is that we are still discovering life on Earth. We don't know of all the life there is on Earth. We discover new species every year. Okay, and we'll come back to that point as well in a future lecture. Okay, so given the data that we have, some of it okay, some of it not okay, it's getting better, so it's improving. People and let me say scientists, often end up on one of two ends of the spectrum for this question. Okay, on the one end, we call this the principle of mediocrity. Okay, people who agree with the principle of mediocrity, they basically take the view that there is nothing unique or special about the Earth, that the biochemistry and the physics and everything that happens here is very common, very easy. It could happen anywhere in the universe. It didn't just happen on Earth because there's nothing special about Earth. And so as such, it must be the case that life could be common everywhere throughout the universe. Okay, so in a very kind of real way, that's an extension of the Copernican hypothesis of the idea that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Okay. The other end of the spectrum is usually called the rare earth hypothesis. And people who tend towards the rare earth hypothesis, they look at the complexity of the molecular machinery of life. And it's very complicated. We don't even understand it all ourselves still today. There's lots of parts and lots of bits that have to work together in tandem and in sequence. And it's very difficult sometimes to imagine that the number of different developments that happened and had to happen in order to work together can happen often by random chance. Okay, and so if you think that it's unlikely that molecular machinery can spontaneously develop, even given the random chances that happen, then you might imagine that it's not easy for nature to realize life, and so life must be rare throughout the cosmos. Okay? So these are the two individual extremes that people end up being on. So what I want you to do today, okay, right now, is take a page in the back of your notebook or find a Post-it note and stick it in the back of your book. And I want you to think carefully about what you think right now. Okay, are you on the principle of mediocrity side? Do you think that life may be common in the universe? Or are you on the rare earth hypothesis side? Do you think life may be uncommon? Okay. There is also a middle ground here. You may think you really don't know enough to make a definitive viewpoint, right? You know, I could butter you up with beer and pizza, and we could have long conversations and convince you to give me an answer to that question. But if you don't want to answer the question, you certainly don't have to. You can adhere to the principle of indecision right now. But I want you to write down on a piece of paper, the back of your notebook or a Post-it note somewhere that you can find at the end of the quarter, today's date, and which one of these possibilities you think you're in. Okay, there is no right, no wrong answer. Everyone has their own viewpoint, and I purposefully haven't told you my viewpoint. And maybe by the end of the quarter, you'll be able to figure out what my viewpoint is. We'll see. But I want you today to think about what your viewpoint is, and then we'll come back to this at the end of the quarter. We'll ask, after an entire quarter of discussing what the possibility of life being elsewhere in the cosmos might be, whether or not you've changed your mind. And do you now fall with the rare earth hypothesis, or do you now fall with the principle of mediocrity? Okay? Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to talk about this time. Next time, we'll start diving into the question of what do we mean when we talk about this question of what is life. Okay? Have a good day, class. We'll talk to you later, and I'll see you online. Okay? Bye-bye.